Years of work, meticulous research, and once more the Fortress of Louisbourg looks over Louisbourg Harbor as it did in the 18th century. Except for one thing, the harbor today is practically deserted. As Lewis Parker and his helper Art Fennell have discovered, the harbor at Louisbourg in the days when it was France's toehold on the New World was a busy place, a fishing port, a prosperous trading community, a haven for French naval vessels, and more. That's one thing the visitor to today's Louisbourg doesn't see, the busy life of the harbor. But now Lewis Parker has changed all that with two immense murals, correct down to the tiniest details, that recreate 2 days in the month of August, 1744. One is of the harbor as seen from the tower of the King's Bastion, with all of the teeming life of what was a major New World port on display. But it's more than that. It's a portrait of a community, as accurate and detailed as exhaustive research can make it. Lou, it seems that every time I meet you, you're filling in tiny, tiny details on some monster canvas. But this one at 10 feet by 5 feet and its companion piece the same size, I guess are the largest things I've seen you working on yet. You seem to have managed to get most of Louisbourg in this.
Yeah, this is, I have done larger things, but not things that include so much detail, so much concentrated detail. For instance, it has to be divided into pretty well, this one, Mural 1, into very definite areas of the background, the far shore, the harbor itself with the 81 ships, the housing area with its various activities, and then the foreground with its activities supplemented by housing details.
In other words, what all the people and the things are doing.
Right.
And that's the other thing. It's not just a matter of detail, but it's also a matter of historical accuracy, isn't it?
The accuracy is, I guess it's actually more important than the painting in this case, because it's an illustrative process to depict exactly what it looked like in the summer of 1744 in Louisbourg.
That is the time period.
Yeah, August of 1744.
It's a long time ago. Obviously, people's memories don't go back that far, so they need this sort of thing to help them.
Just to jog along visitors, particularly to Louisbourg, who can see a lot of the animation, which is provided by the people here, but it's fairly hard to imagine that great vast harbor out there, which is empty now, except for the fishing fleet that comes into Louisbourg itself. It's hard to imagine that the whole place existed as a port for ships from New England, from Britain, from France, or from France and from Britain, as is evident over in this section here. These are captured ships.
Yes, there was a war going on at the time.
Yeah.
So I guess the British were persona non grata unless they were escorted by French warships. When did the work on this painting begin?
It actually began in December of 1980 when I first came down here to see if it was feasible to do some graphics relating to the subject. And in December of 80, we tried different aspects to see which would best tell the story that had to be told regarding the harbor. And there is this one which is viewed from the King's Barracks, from the tower at the King's Barracks, looking out mainly at this ship relative to the other mural, because the other mural, you're up in one of the masts, on one of the spires, looking back at the King's Barracks tower. And
so that the two views are completely complementary.
Completely coordinated, not exactly to the day. For instance, the activity that's going on this ship in the other mural could have taken place a couple of days earlier. And so, of course, the activities in this one, in the foreground here, can't be seen in the other.
And the weather seems to be different, too.
The weather, yeah, the fogs come in the other one.
Well, people in Louisbourg know about fog. I have one of your early sketches, I guess it is, not perhaps the earliest, but it does give some impression of the beginnings of this sort of project.
Right, this was, this was fairly well along after we decided what the aspect should be, what the parameters were, that we should include the island battery on the right, all the way over to the, I better put this down, all the way over to the Dauphin demi-bastion over at the other side. And to do this, it had to be sort of squeezed. The whole perspective had to be squeezed in, just slightly, and the harbor itself had to be raised, a little more than slightly, to meet all the requirements.
So that you could see what was going on and what was there.
Yes.
Also, you have a lot of these activities that are sketched in, too.
Yeah, by this time, the, well, no, I can see, no, this is one of the early ones, with my impression of how I like to orchestrate or choreograph the thing. And this was before the meetings which decided, for instance, that there would not be sheep in the foreground here. There would not be these bullock carts being pulled along here. They would be restricted, for instance, to the woodlot area. That there wouldn't be, the lime kiln wasn't functioning at that time, and so it would be dead. That would have given me a nice complementary stack of smoke equal to the stack of smoke that's coming from Careen Point here.
What is that stack of smoke at Careen Point now that we've mentioned it?
Well, that is the particular area where they took the ships that had to be careened, tilted over.
I see there's one there now.
Well, I haven't put in the details on that yet, but it is there with the fire coming from it. So that just for the simple task of scraping its bottom and repainting the bottom. And that had to be done quite frequently with the ships at that time.
And presumably refilling the cracks with tar and so forth,
right,
which would explain that dense black smoke.
Exactly.
Right. So this then was a sketch in which you put in your ideas of what activities might be used, and that gave a basis for argument, did it?
Indeed it did. It gave the committee something. We had a number of meetings, and this project and the other mural too was all done by committee. There was 14 people involved with determining exactly what the content of the mural was. I had the pleasure of rendering it.
Well, I'm not sure that it would be a pleasure. It certainly wouldn't be to me, but it looks like an onerous task, in fact.
Well, this is the painting part, and that's the part I enjoy.
Of course, you must. This was an interesting thing, a section of the chart of the harbor at Louisbourg, with some ideas of where these ships that we see all in the background here should be located and why.
Right.
Can you explain some of that?
Well, all these ships existed in the harbor at some time during August, and they were located on this chart, on this graph, by Alex Storm, who researched it thoroughly.
You mean August of 1744?
That's
these ships
right.
would have been there?
That's exactly right. And I couldn't get all of the ships. See, to determine this, Alex had to go through all the soundings, I mean all the depth, which could take, for instance, a large 1,000-tonner from one of the East Indiamen, which parts of the harbor could support a great 64-gun man of war, and where the various kinds of ships would be collected. For instance, the captured British ships are over to the left there. I couldn't put all the ships in that were recorded because it comes to some 140, and that would have required a lot more harbor than, a lot more size for me to get all the ships in.
And a lot more time.
And a lot more time.
How many did you actually manage to wedge in here?
I think the last count was 81, and but that's from the man of war down to the chaloops.
There's another example. If you just hold that chart there, we can get a little impression of how that worked. Because we see it all color-coded here.
That's right.
With the suggestion of where these vessels might have been.
And the same
and
color
now we
here.
can see the same color coding in a preliminary sketch for the location of those ships on the final painting.
Yes. Now, this was before I distorted the horizon upward, and so everything is kind of hugging the horizon at this point. I had to raise the horizon and separate these so that we could see over the top of the ships in the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
And these, as mentioned, are keyed to the ones that Alex suggested here, and they're all named. Men of war, merchants, I think there's 2 corsairs, the English prizes over at that
They're
end.
the ones in blue.
In blue, yeah. Large vessels which aren't...
That would be your East Indiamen, would it?
That would be it, yeah. And the transports. And then from the fishing vessels down to the chaloops, of which there are 47 in here. Well, a total of 82, yeah. And it was fun doing this part. I did a number of these sketches because it had to have a practical application because the ships had to be where they were, but it had to also have a sort of an aesthetic interpretation so the painting would balance and not tip over one way, which might explain why I went to the density of the smoke coming from the Crean Point. Smoke did come at an amazing volume from there, but as you can see, the weight of ships is over the left-hand side, and this helps in a way to sort of
balance the composition.
Right.
Well, it all makes good sense, I guess. Let me take those down because a couple of other interesting aspects that we might touch on here. The buildings that you show in the foreground of the painting, are they all the ones that have been reconstructed in the present reconstructed town of Louisbourg?
Yes, up to a point, I think, limited by, and I can never remember the names of these places. Was that the Grange? I think that was the Grange, and a little beyond. So all these houses back here, which are depicted in the other mural from the quay side, are all reconstructed from Yvon Leblanc's projection of where they must have been.
We have an example of that. This is Yvon Leblanc's projection?
That's right.
And he did historical research to establish that these buildings actually were there at the time. Is that right?
That's exactly what he did. And not only there, but named and suggested in which order. For instance, there's the Beau Séjour, I think 1 and 2. There's the Delors storehouses, 1, 2, and 3. There are certain unidentified ones, things that haven't yet been identified, but they're suggested in here.
They knew the buildings were there because they'd located the foundations, but they'd not managed to identify them as far as use or ownership.
That's right, yeah.
I see.
And it was fairly easy to work from Yvon's, as you see. He has taken the original, the blueprint of my original sketch, the smaller sketch, and started extending them here, and then he put this over it and determined exactly where they would go because I was quite confused as to exactly how much of each house you could see, and he determined what you would see from the height that we've established in the tower.
I must admit that the thing that really impresses me is the lengths you go to for this historical accuracy, determining that these buildings, which have not been reconstructed, were in those particular locations, because no one would know,
That's right.
No one would know.
But the whole fortress is done on the basis that it's true to its original construction, and of course anything that's done to animate that must be true to the original construction too. And this is certainly, I didn't have to do the research. The research was done for me, and it made it so much easier to do the delineation beforehand, before I started painting.
Were there specific individuals involved in particular types of research? That is, one on houses and one on ships and so on?
That's right, and one on archaeology, and some on history, and there were experts who knew costume, experts who knew exactly what the military procedures were in the changing of the centuries, and all these things I could never have imagined myself. They had to be determined. Incidentally, some of the people in here are people who were identified at that time. This is Degan's house. This is Degan, and I forget who. My memory doesn't support me right now, but all these people are very specific people.
What about costume?
The costume was supplied by Florence McIntyre. What's this, McIntyre? Yeah. Who went over, no, not this one so much, but the other mural, went over and numbered the 200-odd people in it and chronicled the numbering of those people to each costume they should wear, which was a job that I had been dreading to do myself, and luckily I didn't have to do it.
Gave you a detailed list of everything that they were wearing, is that it?
That's right, and made sure when I was sketching them up that they had correct details too.
I gather that the historical archives, the books that you can consult, and the drawings that can be consulted right here at the Fortress of Louisbourg, just an incredible variety.
Indeed it is. That's well, everything to do, of course, with the reconstruction is all on blueprints that I have access to. Then there's the photographs of the houses which exist that that were taken by Art Fennell from the tower of the King's Barracks, so that everything can be placed exactly as it was.
I suppose we could, August 1744, we could mention that as a date with reference to various events in the history of Louisbourg, because that was about a year, I guess, before the New England forces came up and took the fortress.
Yeah.
And of course several years before Wolfe did it again in, what was it, 1758 or 9.
Yeah.
So that it was at a period when Louisbourg was really at the height of its powers, when it stood here on the coast and guarded the Gulf.
Yes,
for France.
And that was exactly the point that I think why that particular month was chosen, because there was so much activity in the harbor, so much activity by the people who occupied the town and by the military that supported them.
You used the word activity there a couple of times, and that takes me back to all of the things that are going on here. Now, have all of these, we mentioned the fact of the costumes and military etiquette and so forth, but are all of the activities here also researched in detail to be accurate?
Yes, they are. The coopers here in the yard were presumed to have worked there, and so there was research involving how does a cooper go about making his barrels. There was this chair, I forget what they're called now.
Sedan chair.
Sedan chair is actually being reconstructed, and it was nice to be able to make that little formal parade coming up here and have some informal action very close by children who are playing. Actually, it's sort of it's another little bit of theatrical choreographing. Workmen, the little parade, the formality here, the nun with the little children here, and the kids playing, then the more or less ordered military discipline shown here, then the people coming off guard, formally coming off guard here, and then just coming away from their duties during the day here. The chopping of wood, which was a great activity at that time, is depicted here, and that gave a chance for some action right up in the foreground. Men of the regiment, the Carrere regiment, being shown here. They were wounded soldiers, and give me a chance to show that activity.
I rather like this.
Yeah, this
Two
is
children bringing the cows home.
Yeah, well, whenever I can get kids into these things, I love to do it because.
Well, this is a beautiful contrast you have over here. The three young children and the nun walking very sedately and soberly down the street, and these four unsupervised, or five unsupervised children playing leapfrog and with the dog and running around in the grass. And,
yeah, the contrast.
It's marvelous. Lou, there are a couple of pencil sketches that you've done here, I guess to decide what the activities are going to be and where they're going to be located.
That's right. These are earlier pencils of which the final pencil, which constituted this blueprint, was made. And this is the two figures on the extreme right of the painting. Here, three figures here, two figures here. And these people are very specific people. One is Degan, one is the town major's aide, and one is the town major. These are soldiers who are pulling in wood collected from the very sparse amount of wood that was left within 6 kilometers of Louisbourg by this time, who are bringing the wood in and being directed by the sergeant over to this area here. As you see on this pencil sketch, this original pencil sketch, I hadn't suggested to the sergeant. He had to come in to it because the eye was being taken right out of the end of the painting here, and so a little device had to be used to bring the eye back in. And
So you have his pointing finger to take you back into the painting.
That's right, and it just happened to work because he would want the wood to be taken over to here.
Well, it just happens that his pointing finger takes us into this next pencil sketch that I have here.
That's right, and this is the activity between them and the guardhouse. That would fit about like that. Now this military activity, as a changing of the sentries, was figured out precisely by John and Peg Fortier, who gave me such details as the corporal carrying his musket on not his left shoulder, but his right shoulder, and details like this, and exactly where they stood. This all had to be...
And this chap in the doorway with the halberd, who is presumably the officer of the day or something, is he?
That's it was the sergeant overseeing the activity, and a little drummer lad standing here as just, I wanted something to break out this arrowhead again pointing out of the picture, and a circle always breaks an arrowhead.
And the drum slung over his back.
That's right, and that gave me a little spot of color there.
Lou, I got the impression that you made one of these small pencil sketches for each one of the multifarious activities that are taking place throughout the entire painting.
Yeah, after we had decided that exactly what activities needed to depict a summer day in August of 1744, then I had to concentrate on setting the stage, putting the actors in place, and having them do their thing.
Well, you certainly have given us a very good impression of, I'm not sure whether it's rare weather or not, but a beautiful sunny day in August of 1744, and the harbor of Louisbourg, filled with all of the activity, and the town, pretty much as it has been reconstructed and stands today for anybody who comes out here and has a look. What I'd like you to do now is come back next week, and we'll go up to the crow's nest here, and we'll have a look at the town from the other side.
Good.
Okay?
Right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
way back January 27, 83.
It's the kind of sight you will never see today. But if you had been in Louisbourg, in the tower of the King's Bastion, in August of 1744, this is almost exactly what you would have seen. The teeming life of Louisbourg Harbor, when this town was the chief French settlement on Canada's Atlantic coast. Louis Parker was just completing this and another painting when our heritage crew turned up in Louisbourg. It seemed an ideal opportunity to study the paintings and ask Lou about the work and research that went into them. While this painting shows the harbor from the town, the second painting shows the town from the harbor, nearly perfectly complementary views of the same subject, taken on different days to demonstrate Louisbourg's changeable weather. And Louis Parker was delighted to talk to us. He didn't even put down his brush. Lou, we've just lurched back in time, the best part of 250 years, I guess, from the present day back to, August of 1744, when the waterfront at Louisbourg, or Louisbourg as we call it today, was a scene of a lot of activity, and the town beyond it as well. This is the second of the two paintings that you have now finished to show what life was like in Louisbourg in those days. Let's talk about the beginnings of this, because I have a very rough sketch here, which would seem to indicate one of the first attempts to visualize what is now in color behind it.
That's right. This goes back quite a ways. I was already working on the other one, the view from the King's Barracks Tower.
Well, would you explain what the view is here? Where are we now?
Well, we're on a spar near the top of the sister ship to Lardon. It was called Le Brillant, and it sat just to the east. I forgot my directions right. Just this side of the ship, anyway. And as a matter of fact, one of the sketches later on, I've got a spar jutting out here to suggest that that's the end of the spar you're standing on, but then it seemed redundant, and it seemed to clutter this whole area. So we left the ship out. But you can see the Le Brillant from the other, in the other mural.
So we're in the crow's nest, then, of one of the main spars in Brillant.
That's right.
Looking at the activity in the harbor and the town beyond.
Right. And
all right.
That was the idea was to, the extent here was to go from the Pièce de la Grave at this side, and to be able to show, well, hopefully, we should have been able to catch the Dauphin demi-bastion as we did in Mural 1, but it was just too much distortion to keep this mural the same size as the other. So we decided not to go much beyond the Frederick Gate, which is a highlight of the quay side anyway.
Well, Lou, in spite of the fact that this is a very early sketch, some of the things that are in the finished painting are showing up even now, like Frederick Gate is still there, and Lardon is still more or less in the same place. Some of these things have moved around a bit. But let's get on and see, well, some of the later things. There is a sketch which is a bit later, a bit more detailed than the one we just saw.
Right.
But even here, there are changes in this area.
Yeah, this is still before the decision to use the pile driver scene. We had started to put some activity on the quayside. Oh, and incidentally, by this time, we had the helicopter flying over and taking various aspects of the town. And this is one of the views from the helicopter, at least it's adapted quite liberally from the helicopter view.
So you actually had a helicopter go out and take pictures from roughly where that crow's nest would have been.
Right. Unfortunately, I'm too chicken to go up on a helicopter myself, and so other people did it for me, and I was appreciative of that. I was still thinking, my knowledge of ships at this time I thought was fairly good, but I was just still thinking of a ship of perhaps the 17th century with a rather sweeping deck and a raised...
And a much higher poop.
And a much higher poop deck.
Right.
And of course, if I'd realized that right from the start that I couldn't have that swinging angle down, it would have been a lot easier. I eventually had to straighten this whole thing across and then use other devices to lead the eye around.
You were using that curve to lead people's eyes into the activities in the painting.
That's right, yeah.
I see. Well, couldn't get away with that. However, you've learned a lot about ships in the
Indeed
past
I have.
year and a half or so. And we have an example of, this is an early one too.
Very early, and I feel rather embarrassed about this. It was before I had any idea of how the stern was constructed, and it's just a lot of guesswork. And until
What did you have to work from?
at this point, I had the material coming in that Alex Storm was collecting, but we had to establish a ship that would have existed in 1744 as a 64-gun ship, and we didn't have any specific reference for that. The main reference came from a ship that was built about a half a century later and done up in detail in book form by a man named Boudriot in France, and they were a tremendous amount of help, even though, and with Alex Storm's help. Alex Storm has done an awful lot of work on the ships with me. And with his help, we were able to adapt the later ship to evidence we had of earlier ships.
Well, there wouldn't have been that much change even in 50 years in ship design, I wouldn't think, at that time.
Well, it just so happened that in the 80s, in the 1780s, great changes were made compared to the previous 200 years. And I had no concept of what they were. And as I say, with Alex's help, we determined exactly what they were.
It strikes me that you must have had run into a great many problems, because Lardon is so large and so very much in the foreground that the details really have to be absolutely accurate.
Right.
You mentioned the difficulty with the stern gallery and stern quarter castles, or whatever it is they're called.
Yeah.
And I guess we have an example or two of the various stages that you went through.
Oh boy, that looks so ridiculous now. I was trying to conceive of the back. See, the only reason this exists is that we could have our little group of naval people with the visiting potentates from the town on the back, and that would be sort of a focal point for the whole mural. So to get that staged properly, I had to find out exactly what the construction of this was. And this is very early. This is before I tried for the double curve. That is, the angle that we're taking, the ship goes this way, and yet it bellows out this way. And we're looking, and those two lines meet and make a straight line, which is very confusing in perspective. Mm-hmm. That was an early stage of the quarter castle. And thank goodness Alex was so adamant about getting the proportions correct on this. I must have drawn this thing with his help, and he drew it a few times, about a dozen times, and finally got to understand what it was all about.
Well, what really are the differences between this and the way it should have been?
For one thing, at that period, I've jutted the railing in here, because I don't know why I did that. I just wanted to break up the back a bit. Well, that happened, I think, on some British ships. It might have happened on the HMS Nelson ship.
The Victory?
Victory. It might have happened on that. I'm not quite sure. But it certainly didn't happen in the French ships. Well, by this time, with Alex's help, I was beginning to understand the difference between a Dutch ship, a French ship, and a British ship. And as soon as I understood that, then the quarter castle itself started to make some sense.
How long did it take you to complete the basic work on Lardon?
On Lardon itself, that must have gone on for at least 3 months. And that was from the original scribbles until the final assistance from Niels Janisch, who came up from Halifax, to verify exactly where how much of the rigging went down into the wheelhouse and where they were connected. And between Niels and Alex, we finally determined where all this rigging goes. Up until that stage, I guess 3 months total on just the ship. And in the meantime, trying to establish, of course, the action for the quayside, the angles for the other ships, which are based on examples that Alex gave me. These, the Saint Joseph and the Saint Malo, I think were actually in the harbor. There were ships that were in the harbor, and I don't know if there were specific descriptions, but by what they carried and where they were anchored, Alex could come up with the knowledge of what kind of ships they should be.
The Saint Joseph and Saint Malo, they were fishing vessels?
Now you've got me on that one. I can't quite recall.
I only ask because of this activity here, where they're trying to disentangle the shark, is it, from the net?
Right. Well, this was a happy coincidence. Someone happened to mention, I wanted to get some action between this ship and this ship. And someone happened to mention that the basking shark was often caught in the nets of the fishermen, and that the ships that were in port would help the owners of the small chaloops save their nets by lifting the shark out of the water by the tackle, and very carefully, because it was very expensive material, the netting for a fisherman. Very carefully they would work the netting off instead of having to cut it off if they couldn't put it up in that position. So that gave me, see the angle here, and this angle that leads into the flagpole, which I could break with the landing gull here, just worked out perfectly. I was so pleased with that.
But it doesn't necessarily mean that the Saint Joseph is a fishing vessel simply because the net is there.
That's right.
It's assistance being offered to a fisherman.
I think it was a trader. I'm not sure, though. The other, this schooner here, Gaines Saint Charles, it was in the harbor at that time, and I had to have Alex determine the depth of certain parts of the harbor, exactly where to put the ships, and we figured that this ship could be in this close to the long wharf. And then again, it gave me a nice step back from the large ship to the quayside.
The barge here, is that loading cargo of some kind?
It's waiting to unload cargo, and the master of the barge is here gesturing for these people to finish their work so that he can come in and get rid of his barrels. But they aren't particularly paying much attention to them. They're just taking their time and unloading their own craft, which is bringing wood from one of the larger ships that are out in the harbor, which are shown in the first mural. As a matter of fact, this barge itself is shown in the first mural, coming in from one of the larger ships.
But this is a different day because the weather is quite different, isn't it, from the first one?
This weather is a little more typical of Louisbourg, to have the density of the humid air, the fog in the background. The way the painting started was much foggier, but we determined that because we wanted to use the painting to show little details of activity, that I couldn't fog it up too much, or we just couldn't see the activities.
And it's important that we see the activities,
Right.
because that's the whole point of the exercise.
Indeed.
In fact, the real focus of the picture is on Lardon, not even all of that, but basically on this stern section where you have all the gold, and
Right.
it really draws the eye.
It makes a nice centerpiece.
You mentioned rigging a while ago, and the fact that you'd done a fair amount of research with Niels and Alex into how that rigging worked. From that, I assume that all of these bits of rigging that we see would actually have been on the vessel. You haven't faked any of it.
None of it. Oh no, I was very serious about doing that. The idea of faking anything that supposedly is realistic or representational and photographic as this, it would, a person who knew the ship would come in and he would reject the whole painting because of the flaws in one little area. And so
And
this is
there's bound to be an expert.
indeed, I hope there are, and I hope that they recognize all the details that have gone into it.
Lou, I have an example here of the kind of detail that you went into, detailed research on the rigging, which you mentioned, because we have it here with a good many of the bits of rigging identified, the mizzen spar brace, for example, and the main course tack, and various other examples. This was all done through help with Niels Janisch and Alex Storm, was it?
That's right, yes. And actually, I had to name these things because when I started translating them to the canvas, and Art Fennell started projecting it up onto the canvas with the projector. See, what happened was that we had to take slides of these things, project them up onto the panel, make the drawing onto the panel instead of using the old grid system, and then start painting around them. Well, these are named simply so that I could, or myself or Art could complete one of the lines and know that where it started and where it ended was right, and didn't get confused with another line.
And this also seems to be a fairly late model of the stern gallery.
That's right. It's just about there. I think there were a couple of changes in the structure here, and the way it went back into the ship. But otherwise, it's fairly close to the final one. Yes.
Well, I want to talk about some of the activities that are going on in the painting. You've mentioned one or two of them already, but there are others that I'd like to concentrate on. But before we get into that, I think we should stop for a couple of messages. Lou Parker talked about the details and the careful research that went into the rigging of L'Ardent, the vessel in his painting's foreground. But the same can be said of any of the multifarious activities that take place on the canvas. To give just one example, there are something like 200 different figures in this painting. Each one is dressed correctly, down to the tiniest detail for the period. For all of these things, Parker was able to call upon the research skills and records of a dozen or more Louisbourg historians, members of the Parks Canada staff. Let's take a few moments to look at some of these details. We mentioned activities. Well, there are activities all over the place on the quayside, through the town. But let's begin with a couple of the activities that you have put in on the ship. Here's one of your rough sketches. What was that one?
This had to do with the men who were working on the ship itself, the seamen, who were in the process of tarring the rigging, which had to be done pretty well every time a ship came into port. And we had to make decisions as to whether the tar would be mixed on the deck, on the open deck. We figured yes. Which kind of bellows would be used. We had examples in Diderot for that. We had to do, there's some guesswork. For instance, the tripod that's holding the cauldron in which the pitch is being heated. We didn't have specific reference on that.
And yet it's logical to assume that there would be a tripod.
Yes, because of the way we have seen them do other activities in the 18th century similar to that.
And you mentioned, I think, quite some time ago, the fact that this group here is a focal point for the whole painting. And we have, I guess, one of your preliminaries for that.
Very early sketches, yeah. I think, yeah, we had established the 4 men and the 2 women. The 2
What
women
is
from
happening?
town. Let's see. I think the captain of the ship is indicating the work being done on the quayside to one of the ladies from town. This, I think, is the governor, because some of the characters changed their roles. I think at one time that was going to be Bigot, but I think that's the governor and his lady, and there was an ensign there standing protectively on the bridge with them. And this is just a figure. It could be anyone, one of the naval figures looking into the door, just to sort of take some of the action away from the hand that's pointing this way.
But essentially it's a few visitors from the town taking a look over this huge French warship.
That's it, yes.
All right, we've mentioned activities on the quayside, and there's a very good one here. You talked about the pile driver. And that is not what we have, is it?
No, that was a very early sketch in this series. I noticed it's sketch number 72, but that came after the first 60, which had to do with the Lardent. At first we thought that the pile driver might have been constructed on a barge off the quay itself, and that they would work out from the quay. But then it just was common sense to assume that once they got that boulder, which weighed a number of tons, lifted up, that the whole barge would have fallen over and gone into the harbor.
So you had to put it on the land itself.
So we put it on the wharf and assumed from evidence, again in Diderot and other sources, that they would have worked from the quay out into the harbor.
It's a very interesting activity, and one obviously that goes on around a harbor like this, and I guess at that time, driving piles to extend a wharf. What are some of the other activities that you're particularly interested in the painting?
Well, there's the, we can't quite see it from here, there's the auction at the other end of the painting. These are people who are just coming off the ships, having arrived at one of the wharves. And another interesting activity was, again, at that end of the mural, up near the King's Barracks, where there's a whole platoon of soldiers going to march down to the Frederick Gate Wharf. And I forget what the incident was. I should have a little index as to all the activities that are going on.
Well, there's so much going on. And these, when you look at them, you realize that they were perfectly natural things to be happening in Louisbourg in August of 1744. Okay. I think you've done a marvelous job on this.
Oh,
and I'm just waiting now to see it in its finished location. Lou Parker, thanks very much.
Thank you.